This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. Today's video will, I hope, serve as an expansion for our glossary playlist. We're going to be exploring the illnesses that pop up in a variety of historical sources, and I am choosing to focus on those illnesses which are perhaps less familiar to us today. And in some cases, that lack of familiarity is due to the near or indeed full eradication of those illnesses in our present day. Alternatively, though, we are less familiar with them because we now know that illness, or indeed those illnesses, by some other names. If there are any illnesses that you have come across that you would like to know more about, but that I haven't covered in this video, please do let me know, because after all, we are building a glossary playlist, and so there will always be an option for me to discuss more terms in the future. But before we jump into today's topic, I want to say an absolutely massive thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring another video on this channel. Squarespace has made building, updating and managing my website so easy. I started out by using their form to see which website template might best fit my needs, and then I was able to customize each part of my website from there. I could choose fonts, colours, layouts and images. It is really as simple as dragging and dropping. You put what you want where you want it. From showing off my most popular videos on YouTube, to hosting my merch store, to managing my email list, my Squarespace website offers me everything I need. And as I've said before, I absolutely love the fact that I can use Squarespace both through my desktop or laptop, but also through an app on my phone. This means that whether I am analysing my website traffic or editing the website itself, I can do that from absolutely anywhere. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And then, when you are ready to launch your website, go to squarespace.com/readingthepast to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. But now, let's take a look at the illnesses of the past. As a prompt to jog my memory about the names of various illnesses for this video, I did take a look at the Bills of Mortality. These sheets were published at various intervals in England, in London specifically, beginning in the 16th century. The Bills of Mortality detail the deaths that were recorded in, and indeed by, a collection of parishes that were in and around London. Helpfully, at least for my purposes, these documents also list what was the determined cause of death for the fatalities recorded. I have been showing a selection of these Bills of Mortality on screen, and I will leave a link to open access sources that I can find for them so that you can go and have a look at these documents for yourselves. There is one final thing that I would like to say before we hop into this glossary, because I think it's necessary that I point out that today I'm going to be discussing and defining numerous illnesses. Many of these illnesses do have symptoms that I think that some people might find distressing. I'm going to say this is almost certainly going to be a no eating episode for nearly all of you. Additionally, if discussion of serious illness and various bodily functions are not something that you want to hear about, then this is the time to click off from this video. Please do look after yourselves. I also hope that you might check out any other videos I've got on this channel, and that you will come back for next week's video that I guarantee will be on an entirely different topic. Right, now that's all covered off, we can dive in to our glossary of illness. Up first, we have apoplexy. In Shakespeare's Henry IV Part 2, the audience is told of that king struggles with, quote, apoplexy. In the world of the play, this seems to be a chronic, fairly slow-moving malady, albeit one with a fairly swift onset. This, particularly the slow-moving part, does run counter to how this term appears to have been understood from at least the 14th century. In modern terminology, we would better recognise apoplexy as a stroke. Bloody flux. This was most commonly an archaic term for dysentery. and dysentery was, it seems, a very popular way for medieval European royals, and indeed many others, to die. Dysentery is a highly communicable bacterial or parasitical illness that affects the intestines. Its symptoms are bloody diarrhoea, among other things. It can, in many cases, be expected to clear up on its own. However, as is common with all sorts of diarrhoea, dehydration is a very big risk factor with this illness too. In some cases, dysentery does require antibiotic treatment to clear it up. And of course, antibiotics are not available before the 20th century, meaning that this is particularly bad news for our medieval counterparts. Consumption. Against the backdrop of humoral medical understanding, the term consumption refers to a perception that a particular sick person had a pronounced imbalance in, or indeed lack of, their humours. It seemed to those observing the unwell person that their necessary humours had been, quote, consumed by some means. And this, they believed, is what had led to the physical wasting or weight loss that they were observing in this particular patient. It is thought likely that the illness that they were observing is what we know today as tuberculosis often presents with evident weight loss. However, I think it's also possible that other conditions that result in weight loss, such as, for example, cancer, may have been called consumption too. French pox. This is an archaic term for syphilis. In an article that was published in the Journal of Medicine and Life, the article being titled Brief History of Syphilis, we are told that, quote, from the very beginning, syphilis has been a stigmatised, disgraceful disease. Each country whose population was affected by the infection blamed the neighbouring and sometimes enemy countries for the outbreak. So the inhabitants of today's Italy, Germany, and United Kingdom named syphilis the French disease. The French named it the Neapolitan disease. The Russians assigned the name of Polish disease, the Polish called it the German disease. The Danish, the Portuguese, and the inhabitants of northern Africa named it the Spanish/Castilian disease. And the Turks coined the term Christian disease. Moreover, in northern India, the Muslims blamed the Hindu for the outbreak of the affliction. However, the Hindu blamed the Muslims, and in the end, everyone blamed the Europeans. Further to this, the authors of this paper also explain that, quote, Paracelsus, the famed scholar who lived between 1493 and 1541, considered that syphilis was the result of a sexual intercourse between a prostitute suffering from gonorrhea and a French leper. Head mould shot. Now this is a tricky one because at a basic level it appears that this refers to a condition or perhaps conditions that affect the skull, its bones and or its sutures. There is, however, some confusion as to whether head mould shot was thought to affect people of all ages or just those in infancy. Now in the latter case, those in infancy, this does make somewhat more sense because it may be describing a condition known as craniosynostosis, which is the premature closure of the sutures of the skull. Alternatively, head mould shot may have referred to the condition hydrocephalus. In either case, both of these conditions are most commonly observed in very young children, and as a result, it makes it difficult to say what head mould shot might refer to if it were to appear, for example, for the first time in a person in adulthood. If it were to be used in this context, i.e. in relation to an adult, it is possible that it's referring to a condition that looks similar, that results from some type of injury or perhaps disease. Imposte. This is a swelling, cyst or abscess that might appear in or on any part of the body. It was also a term that came to be used figuratively, as an indication of some type of moral failing or corruption within either a person or indeed a nation as a whole. King's evil, also known as scrofula. These terms refer to a noticeable issue with an individual's glands or lymph nodes in their neck. It is believed that these issues were usually the result of infection with tuberculosis. The name King's evil relates to the belief that the touch of the monarch would cure this particular affliction. And so, successive French and English monarchs, beginning in the 13th century, would hold ceremonial touchings of their unwell subjects. It was the final Stuart ruler, Queen Anne, who would be the last monarch to perform this particular rite in England. Leprosy. Now, this is certainly a term that I'm sure we are all familiar with today. However, the condition is more properly called Hansen's disease now. Hansen's disease is a bacterial infection that affects the skin, peripheral nerves, and mucous membranes. That loss or deformation of an individual's extremities, which is often understood as being characteristic of this particular illness, is caused by a loss of sensation that in turn results in unnoticed injury and tissue damage. This then results in those parts of the body looking like they have, in quotes, fallen off. Historically, though, other conditions that cause visible differences to the skin, such as loss of pigmentation, which a person might experience if they have vitiligo, or scaly or scab skin, as you might experience if you have eczema or psoriasis, could have led to that individual being treated as though they had leprosy. Rising of the lights. Historically, lights was a term that was used to refer to the lungs, and so rising of the lights is a condition that would manifest in problems with breathing, or perhaps even a feeling of choking or suffocating. Suggestions for a modern condition that rising of the lights might relate to includes gas, heartburn, croup, asthma, pneumonia, and even pulmonary embolism. Spotted fever and purples. This was an illness that caused a fever and a telltale rash of purple spots on the skin. It is thought likely that these purple spots were in fact petechial rashes. These are the kind of spots that we are told today to check, to see if they fade under pressure through the glass or tumbler test. We roll the glass or tumbler over the skin. If the purple spots don't fade, then it's a petechial rash, and that is something that needs urgent medical attention. And so, it is thought likely that spotted fever and purples may refer to illnesses that we know today as meningitis or typhus. Strangury. This is a term for a condition that prevents the normal emptying of the bladder. It may include inflammation of the urinary tract, such as cystitis might cause. It could also have been caused by kidney stones or bladder stones, or even by bladder cancer. Sweating sickness. This illness is said to have first appeared in England in the late 15th century, before disappearing not long afterwards in the middle of the 16th century. Historians and scientists continue to this day to debate just what this sickness actually was. It was characterised by a very swift onset. A person would have chills, a high fever, profuse sweating, and delirium. There is an often repeated and frankly terrifying phrase that was used in relation to the sweating sickness, and that was that a person would be, quote, merry at breakfast and dead by dinner. However, as Anne Boleyn, Thomas Wolsey, and no doubt countless others would show, the sweating sickness was certainly not fatal in all cases. Suggestions for a modern term for this illness include the following: influenza, scarlet fever, anthrax poisoning, perhaps from contaminated wool, typhus, SARS, and hantavirus that might have been spread by the faeces of rodents. Timpani, which for the longest time I thought was the name simply for a musical instrument. In the past, this was a term used to refer to a swelling or a tumour. Tisic. In William Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, Pandarus, Cressida's degenerate uncle, complains of, quote, a whoreson Tisic, a whoreson rascally Tisic. He is describing a condition that is causing him to cough and wheeze. Perhaps a chronic condition like asthma, or maybe a respiratory infection like bronchitis or tuberculosis. Last but by no means least, we have the term wen. In Nicholas Sanders' The Rise and Growth of the Anglican Schism, which was published in 1585, he alleges that Anne Boleyn had, quote, a large wen under her chin, which he also asserts was unattractive and something that she was herself ashamed of, so much so he claims that she always wore high-necked gowns. Doing this would have run counter to most of the female fashions of her day, and so one might assume that might have drawn comment at the time. Sander's account of Anne's appearance has been hotly contested. This is due in no small part to the fact that he was just a child when Anne died, and also because at the time his text was being published, he was a devout Roman Catholic who had entered into exile in order to avoid the faith changes in England that were being wrought by Anne's own daughter, Elizabeth. Nevertheless, the condition he describes, this wen, is one that did exist, even if it did not exist upon Anne. It refers to a swelling or a protuberance. It may have been a cyst, a tumour, a wart, or even a goiter. This refers to the enlargement of a person's thyroid gland. So what do you think of this addition to our history glossary, of the conditions that I have described and defined here? How many of them were you already familiar with? And of course, please do let me know if you've come across any other historical illnesses that you would like me to cover in a future history glossary. As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video. I would also love it if you could pop an emoji or a social glyph in the comments too, because that will boost the engagement, and the more engagement a video gets, the more YouTube shares it out, and that in turn will help us to grow this community. As we've been talking about illnesses, maybe something that relates to that, something medical, maybe hospital emoji, something sciencey, I'm looking forward to seeing what you pick. You can also find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to the place you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some of all of those so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope that you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, why not share it with your friends? And if you like my channel, please let some pals know about it. You can tell me you like this video in particular by hitting a thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel. If you think you are subscribed, now is the ideal time to check to make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you against your will. And while you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please do hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop-down menu that will appear, and that way YouTube claims they will tell you when I've next uploaded, but also when I'm next going to go live, which I do to talk about the history news, and I know you are not going to want to miss that. We have now, of course, got our failsafe. Head to my website, www.katrinamarchant.com, and then as you can see, you head to the contact link, and then you will find a box. Put your email address in that box, and then you'll be added to my mailing list so that I can send you an email once a week with everything I'm up to, but also with links that you might find useful for that week. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.